Good morning. Welcome to today's talk titled The 4-Day Week Economic Wellbeing and Climate Impact, sponsored by the Farm for Change Idea Lab of Institute of European and American Institute of European and American Studies at Academia Sinica. My name is Qianyi Lu. I am a political scientist at the Institute of European and American Studies and a member of Farm for Change Idea Lab. Farm for Change is a multidiscipline project that focuses on climate change and other ecological and environmental issues. Since it was founded a year and a half ago, we have had many important speakers to help sow the seeds of ideas. Hopefully, through Farm for Change, those seeds of ideas can grow. You can find all the past talks with Chinese subtitles on the Farm for Change website. Today's speaker had sowed the seed of a very concrete idea, and we are beginning to see the results of her hard work. Last week, many news media, including CNN and The Guardian, reported that 4-day week is made permanent for most British firms that tried it. Dr. Juliet Schor is the key person that have brought about such a significant change. Dr. Schor is an economist and sociologist at Boston College. Her research focuses on work, consumption, and climate change. Her TED Talk on the subject of 4-day week has nearly 3 million views. She is the leading researcher for the nonprofit organization called 4-Day Week Global, doing trials of 4-day work weeks with companies. She is also author of many award-winning and bestseller books, including After the Gig, The Overworked American, The Overspent American, and Do Americans Shop Too Much? Apart from being a former Guggenheim Fellow and a distinguished visiting professor at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard University, Dr. Schor has also won many awards, including the American Sociological Association's Award for Public Understanding of Sociology and the Herman Daly Award from the U.S. Society for Ecological Economics. Dr. Schor also served as a consultant to the United Nations. Her work and ideas are frequently seen in national and international media, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, and People magazine. She has also appeared on 60 Minutes, the Today Show, Good Morning America, The Early Show on CBS. We are so delighted to have you, Dr. Schor, and the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to all of you for, being here at the beginning of a work day. So I'm really pleased to hear that there is interest in Taiwan in a 4-day week, and maybe we can talk about where things are in your country after my presentation. So what I am planning to do is a talk with some slides to give you an overview of the research we've been doing, a little bit of background on this movement, and I'm going to look at both the well-being impacts for workers that we're seeing, how the companies are experiencing their 4-day weeks, and then Dr. Liu asked me to talk also about the climate impacts, which is something we're also looking at. So let me share my screen and we'll see how this goes. Okay, looking good? Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So 4-day week. Let me start by just saying a little bit more about the kind of interests that we've had. This is just a small sampling of the many stories, media, in both the print media, television, radio, that we've had all over the world with the research that we've been doing for the last actually just over 2 years now. There's tremendous interest in this from the business press, from the sort of news press, from lifestyles, from people who work on climate, pretty much across the board. My favorite story so far came about just after the United Auto Workers, who went on strike some months ago in order to get better conditions. The auto workers put a demand into their bargaining for a 32-hour week with 40 hours of pay. And that was really surprising to so many people because the US labor movement really hadn't had much to say about shorter hours for a very long time. And as you'll see in a minute, this did not start out initially as a labor-driven demand, but that is really starting to change. And this is from the New York Times, from the economic columnists. Typically, the economic columnists of our major papers are not promoting radical ideas, but it was a fully positive, supportive column saying, yes, what the UAW is asking for is a good thing. We need it. We absolutely should do this. Needless to say, they did not win that demand, but it is still resonating. It's still alive. And one of the things I've learned after they came out with that demand, which was a surprise to me, is that in many ways it came from the rank and file. So pressuring their leaders to do something about their long working hours. And what I'm learning from people who are talking to UAW leadership is they're going to keep on with this demand. So, and yes, just in last week, we released a new report from our British trial with results from a full year. And I can say something about that later, but tremendous success continuing. So let's just start with a moment of history. Who's calling for a 4-day week? As I said, it was a surprise about labor. And I think to answer that, let's start with the question of how we got to the 5-day week. So the standard story is that it was the labor movement who brought us the 5-day week. And this is a common graphic in the US. People put this on their car, that the labor movement is responsible for giving people the weekend because we have a 5-day week. But that's not actually how it started. The very first instances of the 5-day week came from Sabbatarians, from Jewish employers, largely in the garment industry, who wanted to observe the Sabbath, Saturday. And so they began by giving their workers Saturdays off, and that this was in the 1920s, even maybe a few as early as in the 19-teens. And here is a magazine put out for and by managers who begin to argue in 1920 in favor of the 5-day week and why it actually increased productivity and reduced their costs and so forth. So instead of paying people more money, 1920, these employers were giving free time. Then, of course, the most famous example of this, because he was the first really large, prominent employer, was Henry Ford. In 1926, he introduced a 5-day work week. At the time, the labor movement was against the 5-day week. They were skeptical about it, and it took them a while to come around. Of course, eventually they did. Okay, now, something has happened when I gave permission for annotation, and now I can't move my slides. Oh, how do I stop this thing?
I think
Could it asked me for permission to annotate, and I said yes, and now it's taken me away. Okay, allow to annotate. Okay, so I'm allowing these folks to annotate, but I got to get off it myself. Sorry, I'm not.
no problem.
Okay, here we go. And then in 1938, in the US, a law called the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed, which enshrined a 40-hour work week as the standard work week. So that was typically a 5-day work week. It did not prevent employers from scheduling more than 40 hours. And in fact, full-time workers in the US didn't get a 40-hour week, but it did mean that for many of the workers, not all, mostly for hourly paid workers, they would have to be paid extra for working more than 40. So that's the history of sort of the players that led us to the 5-day week. And what I'm seeing today is that something very similar is playing out, that it's employers who have really started this trend. We're starting to see, after a couple of years of it, labor unions coming in, and we're starting to also see some government. So why is it? What is leading employers to begin offering a 4-day week to their employees? This is just some US data. There's a lot of similar trend going on around the world, not everywhere. In the US, I would say our levels of stress are higher, at least according to the global surveys. But this is not just a US story, although I'm going to show you some of the US data. So the first thing is that as a result of the pandemic, you had a sharp increase in people's workers, employees, feelings of stress and worry. And here you also have anger and sadness. But the top two lines on this left-hand graph, stress and worry, go up very sharply. 44% of all US employees reported to Gallup, and these are Gallup numbers, experiencing stress a lot of the day yesterday. So that's a lot of the day. That's a really strong finding, and 40% with worry. The next graph shows you employee engagement and disengagement. And what you see is that during the pandemic, employee engagement, that's the extent to which people are really involved, engaged, enthusiastic with their jobs, trying hard, versus disengagement, where they are, really doing as little as possible. So changes in that, increased numbers of disengaged. Something that we called in the US the Great Resignation, a historically high number of Americans just leaving their jobs, quitting, just too stressed out, not willing to take those working conditions any longer. Of course, many of them have gone back into the labor force. They didn't leave permanently. Some people have called it the Great Reshuffle, but it means that for employers, they are experiencing high levels of resignation, which are, very costly and problematic. This is one, I haven't been able to update this one, but US people searching, this is Google Trends, searching for burnout from work. And you see just a tremendous increase in the number of people looking online to learn about burnout because they're feeling burned out. And then the final one is unfilled job vacancies. So we are in a period in which people are feeling burned out, they are feeling stressed out, they are disengaging from their jobs, they are quitting their jobs, and many employers are sitting, you can see, with really historically high numbers of unfilled job vacancies. So people are leaving and they're having trouble replacing them. This is the backdrop which has led to high levels of interest in the 4-day week. So where did it come from? What are the origins? So as I mentioned, it's what it is, an employer-driven beginning. So the the research that we're doing, the companies that we're following, they are opting into a 4-day week because their senior managers, the founders, the CEOs, etc., think this is something that they should do. So the sort of origins of the research that I've been involved with are in New Zealand with a company called Perpetual Guardian. It's was founded and owned by a man named Andrew Barnes, and he read an article in The Economist saying that the average person works only 2 to 3 hours a day. Now, that's, in my mind, a ridiculous statistic. I don't know where it came from. I haven't actually been able to find it, but he read it somewhere, and he thought, well, if my people are only working 2 to 3 hours a day, what about giving them a day off as long as they, work more on the other 4 days? And he called this the 100-80-100 model, meaning I'm going to give people 100% of their pay, so no pay reductions. They're only going to have to work 80%, but I'm going to expect that they do 100% of their work. In other words, they take all of the work that they currently do and put it into 4 days, so no reduction in productivity. He organized a trial for this. It was a big success. It continues to be a success at Perpetual Guardian. And then with his partner, Charlotte Lockhart, he founded this organization, 4-Day Week Global, which I eventually connected with and began doing research for. The idea was to replicate, to some extent, the trial that Perpetual Guardian had done and to study what happened. So the first trials began just over 2 years ago, beginning of February 2022. We recruited companies from Ireland. There was already a group in Ireland starting a trial, and then we hooked up with 4-Day Week Global. And then in the US, and pretty much in that first year, every 2 months, we started a new trial, mostly nationally based, but companies are able to join the trials of other countries because all of the work is done online. So the idea was for 2 months of onboarding at the beginning to do what 4-Day Week Global called work reorganization. So, and then after 2 months of work to try and figure out how to make this work for the company, they start the new schedule and go for 6 months, and we study them. The requirements for participating are just to maintain pay at 100% and a meaningful reduction in hours. A few of these companies, very few, decided to reduce hours a little bit less. So what is this work reorganization? The idea, and sort of how does it relate to this 100-80-100 model? Well, the idea is that if workers are really not working that hard in all 5 days, which was Andrew Barnes' idea, he thought that was what was happening, there could be ways to reorganize work to make people more productive, and in particular, to take away the sort of low productivity activities like meetings or distractions, etc., that are preventing people from doing their work efficiently. So the idea is we work with the companies for 2 months, and then they start the new trial. So that's what it was. This is the trial participation, beginning with the group that's just about to start in Germany. But we are now, now have 9 trials that have begun, and obviously with their 6-month trials, many of them have finished. But you can see here, some of them are, quite substantial. The UK, it was the largest with about 2,500 employees, but 700, 800, 900 employees in many of these trials, different numbers of companies. We are also collaborating with researchers in Portugal. There's a Portuguese government study. We are doing the research for the government of Scotland. We have a big trial starting in Brazil. We have another African trial starting. So we're in many parts of the world. And as we were talking about earlier, before I began talking, we have a partnership agreement with someone in Singapore, but that's the only East Asian partnership that I know of at the moment. So what about the research? We have 4 kinds of data that we're collecting. The first is from employers. We get information about the companies when they come in, and then we ask them to give us a small number of metrics. The problem is many of these are small companies that don't have standardized productivity metrics, so we can't get those, but we have revenue, labor retention, absenteeism, new hires, actually that's not on the slide, and energy use we ask for. And then we also ask the employers to rate the trial at the end of 6 months, how well it went. With employees, we're just starting our 5th wave, so we survey them at baseline, i.e. before the trial begins, at 6 months, at 12 months, at 24 months, and also at 3 months. So 5 waves, a wide variety of things. I'm going to show you all these variables in a minute. At 3 months, we ask people to complete a time use diary for their most recent day off. So how are they spending that off day? And then we're also doing qualitative interviews, in-depth interviews, in some cases before the trials begin, mostly post-trial. So just a little bit about the companies and the people in here. So the biggest group is professional services. We have a lot of people in advertising, graphic design, lawyers, etc. We have only about 8% in construction and manufacturing, but there are some, about 6% in IT, and then we have a lot of nonprofits and civil and social services, and we're starting to see some more healthcare organizations joining. One big thing about these companies is that there's a large number of small ones, so almost a quarter of them are less than 10 employees. The biggest companies that we have are about 1,000. Actually, we have one that was a 5,000. They started with 1,000 people in the trial, and now they're expanding it. This is in many ways an artifact of the setup, because if you are a big company, you don't need to go to a little nonprofit like us to do a 4-day-week trial. There's nothing really that we can do that you couldn't do yourself, and I think that's a key part of it. In terms of the employees, about 3/4 of them have college degrees or more. About a quarter don't have a college degree. You can see the age range is fairly wide. It skews a little bit young, but this is not that different than the global labor force distribution. And one reason I included age here was because some people think this is just something that only young people like, and that's not what we're seeing. It does skew female. We have a little over 60% of these employees are women. It's partly the kinds of occupations and industries that we're in, and about 75% of them are white. Most of our sample is an Anglophone sample at this point, and some of the other non-English speaking countries that we're collaborating with, the data hasn't been given to us yet. And some of them are just starting, like the German trial, and we have a Swedish trial. So I'm going to throw a lot of things here at you. They all pretty much are going in the same direction, and then I'm going to show you a few in more detail. But the first point, and this is on employee well-being, is that we have really strong, consistent, large, statistically significant changes that we see in pretty much all of these well-being measures, whether we're talking about reductions in stress, reductions in burnout, increased job satisfaction, higher physical health, better mental health, reduction in anxiety, increase in positive emotions, decrease in negative emotions, better work-family balance, work-life balance, less conflict between work and family in both directions, higher life satisfaction, higher satisfaction with all realms of life, lower fatigue, fewer sleep problems, more sleep hours, and higher exercise frequency. So pretty much across the board, we're seeing major changes in these things. And this is the fraction of the sample that's experiencing these changes. Of course, you wouldn't expect everyone to, because all kinds of things are also happening to them over these 6 months. They might be experiencing a divorce, or their sleep may go down because they have a new baby. But on average, you can see that for each of these, the fraction of people who are getting an improvement is almost always much larger. It's always larger than the decrease, and in some cases there may not be a lot of change, but these are really, really strong overall findings. 68% of people in the sample experience lower burnout, which is pretty striking. So if you look at what happens to hours, I mean, the first point I want to make is that hours do not fall by 8 hours on average. I mean, there are some people who take on a new job during this time at the company that may require them to work longer hours, or there are some of the very, very senior managers who end up working a little bit more because they haven't figured out how to reduce, and everyone below them is reducing. But there is a quite significant reduction in working hours, and at baseline, you can see that's the pink here. At baseline, the most common schedule is a 40-hour schedule, and at the end point, the most common schedule is the 32. So there is that big reduction in working hours, and you can see the whole distribution moves to the left, meaning shorter hours of work in comparison to where people start. So these are the variables that I just talked to you about a minute ago, and the reason I put them back up here is that I'm now going to show you a statistical model to explain these changes in burnout, job satisfaction, mental health, physical health, and positive emotions, all of which improved over the period. And I should say that the sample I'm using here is pretty much, at this point, everyone who's finished the trial. So it's a couple of thousand people. What we find when we model, so why is it that working well-being is going up so much? The first thing we find is that the bigger the reduction in hours, the greater the gains in well-being. And we have four categories here. One, our reference category, people who didn't change their hours or whose hours increased. That's about, I think, 20 to 25%. And then we see if they reduce by 1 to 4 hours, 5 to 7, or 8 hours or more. And what you can see from these coefficients here, I think you'll be able to see my cursor, is that the larger the hours reduction, the bigger this number, meaning the bigger the reduction in burnout. And you can see the same thing here. The bigger the hours reduction, the larger the increase in job satisfaction, in positive emotions, mental health, and physical health. So the more that hours reduce, the greater the gains in well-being. And so that's a very strong support for the idea that what's happening here is it's the new schedule that's helping people. I was just looking to see if I included another slide on this, but we also have what's called a mediation effect to figure out, okay, so what is it about changes in hours? Because the fact that people's hours are changing, a lot of other things are changing too. So why is it that shorter hours help people so much? And the answer is that there are two major kinds of effects. One is from what we might call the lifestyle effects. The fact that people are sleeping more, they're exercising more, and they have less fatigue and fewer sleep problems. All of those contribute a great deal to the well-being through that reduction in hours. The other side of things is that they are what's happening at work, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. But basically, they feel a lot more productive at work, and that contributes to their well-being. So their work experience really improves. What about the companies? So we asked the companies to rate the trials at the end of the trials, and overall the rating across these companies is an 8.5, and productivity and performance rates at a 7.5. So they're pretty happy. I'm going to show you some other findings that speak to the companies in a minute. I mentioned the classic model to you, the 100-80-100. The idea is that these are workplaces that have relatively low work intensity, that can reorganize work to save people's time. So they change their meetings culture. They create much more focused time where people are not distracted. Some of them do process engineering. They change the flow of work. So one of the companies that got a lot of attention is a brewery in the UK. They went through sort of time and motion studies to figure out how to save time in the way they organize things. Some of them tweak the model a little bit if they have problems, to create some availability on the off day to be able to call people if they need. So why does it work? One is something that's sort of colloquially called Parkinson's law, the idea that work expands to fill the available time. And especially in these white-collar workplaces, they've gotten a lot of new technology that allows them to do many things faster, but they haven't reduced work time. There's been a sort of bottleneck to not reduce work time for a long time. And so work has just gotten inefficient. The other thing is that meetings cultures tend to be very dysfunctional. And people also talk about how they've become more creative and just much more productive. So we can talk about this in the Q&A. In the work that I'm doing outside of the 100-80-100 model, I'm also finding a group of companies that I call 100-80-80. They are high-intensity workplaces that are just giving people time off, and they're not going through this work reorganization process because they've already done all of that. There's no wasted time to be found. They're just burning out their workers. A lot of these are in healthcare, restaurants, etc. Okay, so I told you what the company ratings were, but in the end, probably the most important thing to see the success of these is whether or not they are continuing with it. So we have a rate of continuing and discontinuing at 6 months, and we found just about only 6% discontinuing, meaning going back to a 5-day schedule. We have a few who are pausing the trial, either because they're small companies and people went on leave, or they need to do some other things. But basically, we've got this 85% who are continuing, and it might be higher. We just lost touch with a few of them, and we're still trying to get that data from them. You can see a little bit of variation here across industries, which is construction and manufacturing, a little bit higher, and that other category. The retail looks like we've got a couple of retail, but remember, these are very small numbers of companies that aren't continuing. One of the questions we might want to ask about that 100-80-100 model is it what we would call a speed up? Is it just that intensity was low, people are being sped up, and so they can do everything in 4 days that they used to do in 5? If so, I mean, it's still good. People, we have big well-being improvements. People love the 4-day week, but it's a different story than one that just says we've reorganized work to make everybody more efficient. One story is we're just working everybody faster and harder, and the other is they've become more efficient. And so we have a number of measures that we're trying to look at this. One is self-rated pace of work. So that goes, I mean, this number goes up, but it's not significant, meaning it's statistically the 7.6 and the 7.7 are the same. So no change. The workload doesn't change. Self-rated work intensity seems to go up just a little bit, but with a low level. This is a low level of statistical significance. What you see really going up is people's self-rated productivity and something called current workability. We ask them what their current workabilities compare to their lifetime best, and that goes up by almost a whole point. And you can see here, over 50% of the sample are experiencing increases in current workability. And then there's a work smart scale, which also goes up. So basically what's happening is people are working smarter rather than being sped up. The model is actually, I think, working pretty well. We have also just starting some analyses of why these companies are continuing or discontinuing. Most things don't seem to matter. The main thing, the big factors which are affecting whether or not companies continue is how much well-being improvement they're getting from their workers, from the employees. So whether it's working to improve employees. So for here, what we see, and this is the strongest result, the burnout rate, if it doesn't go up much, companies are more likely, if it doesn't fall, if burnout doesn't go down, companies are more likely to discontinue the trial. The ones who are seeing big increases in burnout are more likely to stay with it. The same is true for job satisfaction. We're not sure exactly about this work smart, and it's a little bit. We only have a measurement of it at the end for most of the companies. So that's a work in progress. Okay, I was asked to talk about climate. This is the last major topic that I want to cover, and then we'll get into some conversation. We were very interested in the climate impacts of the 4-day week. There have been a lot of claims about shorter work time and carbon emissions. I myself began studying that question back in the 1990s and have written a series of papers at the national level, cross-national level, and also across US state, showing that economies with shorter hours of work tend to have lower carbon emissions, holding other things constant. Very little work done at the household level or at the company level, which is what we have here. So we started thinking about what could possibly, how would emissions be affected? Of course, the big issue and the number one thing that probably affects emissions is commuting. So if people are commuting one fewer day a week, because commuting tends to be pretty carbon intensive in a lot of these countries we're looking at, that was something. We had to look also at the electricity, heating and cooling at the companies and the homes. If the company shuts down on a Friday, it may be using less electricity, heating and cooling, but people in their homes may be using more. That turns out to be very complicated. I mean, we knew that. We don't have good measures of that yet. We're also interested in changes in household behaviors and spending patterns. One of the big ones we were looking at is a travel rebound. Are people doing more traveling because they have 3-day weekends? Are they doing more cooking and eating more healthful diets because they have more time? And there may be some unanticipated impacts. Some companies aren't closing. Many of these people have hybrid schedules where they're working from home already to a certain extent, so that commuting change may not be too big. It's very complicated. We tried to get energy use data from the companies. We really didn't get much usable data. We also asked for the households. We have travel data. We tried to focus on the big things. But the household energy data has been very messy, and I can't report on it at this moment. We just haven't been able to get it in a very usable form. The other issues is that there's a lot of seasonality, and these are 6-month trials, so that's a problem. We have done some models to try and correct for that, but they're not great yet. And then there have been a lot of fluctuations in energy prices, and we were asking people about their energy bills rather than their usage. So we are working on this. We just put in a new grant to try and really beef up this measurement. But let me show you what we have been able to find. So here are some of the questions we've asked. We began to ask people about their personal carbon footprint. It's just a self-report, but we asked them. There is a reduction, but as you can see, it's not statistically significant. So there doesn't seem to be a change. It's just a small fraction of the sample that we've asked this of in the later months. We have a pro-environmental behavior scale that we've been asking. The first one is the place where we see some change, some statistically significant change. I walk or cycle instead of using my car when I can, never to always. So there's some improvement in that. Not really no change in the others. There is a pretty significant reduction, half an hour of commute time. So we are seeing that. There's a little, not very significant, but a 1% reduction in the percentage of people commuting to work by car. And we are not seeing a travel rebound. So by the time this sample comes around, the seasonality is pretty much eliminated because we've got well, this is about a year and a half worth. But the number of domestic trips taken in the past 4 months declines from the beginning to the end point, and the number of international trips doesn't go up. So we don't think there's much of a travel rebound to worry about. We do ask at the end of the trial some retrospective questions. Did their energy use go up? Did their leisure travel go up? And there we do see some increase from, we ask decrease, no change, increase. So that's sort of looking a little bit different from the before and after. And that's something that we see a little bit in all of the retrospective data, a little bit different. We don't have many retrospective questions because mostly we're looking, over the period from the beginning to the end of the trial. Their time use on the off day also is pretty favorable, optimistic from the point of view of carbon use. Hobbies, that this biggest group of things is hobbies, leisure activities, and then housework and care work, and then personal grooming, like, getting your hair cut or something. People do about one, and these are hours of work. People do about 1 hour of work related to their main job on average. There's less than half an hour spent in transit from one thing to another. So it looks fairly low carbon activity. It's not as if they're spending a lot of time in the car or traveling. I mentioned a couple of the trials, government-sponsored trials that we are part of. The Spanish are doing it on their own, but the Portuguese are using our survey methodology and instrument. We are doing the survey research for the Scottish trial of public sector employees, which has begun. The UAE has a trial. I met with Belgian researchers this morning. The Belgian government has a trial. And we're going to be collaborating on, trying to align some of the questions, survey questions. The U.S. House of Representatives has a bill to reduce the work week to 32. I'm going to testify in about 2 weeks to the U.S. Senate that is holding a hearing on 32-hour week. And we have legislation introduced in 5 states. Actually, there's another one since I put this slide together. So 6 states. And I think my state, Massachusetts, is going to be the first one to pass a law. And so that's it. On the climate and well-being issue, which is what I'll just end with here, I think, as you know, probably everyone on this call understands that the current trajectory of growth that the world is on is not sustainable, that it is required for us to have very rapid, deep, immediate emissions reductions. And this means we need structural changes in the economy. Work time reduction is a powerful mitigation tailwind, helping to reduce energy demand below what it would be if we maintained that, you know, what in economics we would think of as a maximum output path. So shorter hours they're a good climate policy, but they're also a policy that improves well-being for people, and as we see from our results, can be quite positive for employers as well. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. Lots of information and very clearly presented. So we will open up for questions. You see, for people in the audience, you can either just turn up your mic and speak, or there's a sign of a hand. You can click on that, raising your hand. I think I actually have a set of questions. I think I'll just go ahead. I'll begin asking questions. I think I've been doing research on neoliberalism for a while, so I am quite sensitive to what the big corporations, what their tricks are. So when I started reading about 4-day week, I noticed that a lot of pro-business magazines or pro-business media, and also the World Economic Forum, they are very positive about this idea. And I am totally for the idea of 4-day working week. I think most people are burned out, and as you showed, the level of stress it's unbelievable. So it got me into thinking why those pro-business or big corporations or CEOs, how come they certainly become so caring about people? And I think in your study, you also showed one of the reasons is the level of productivity. For them, the productivity goes up, so they are happy about that. I think, I think going forward, it looks like it's going to be a trend globally. And going forward, I think it's going to be a struggle for people like you and me. We believe that growth is not sustainable, or the growth in its current form is not sustainable. We are both believers in degrowth. So in that sense, for big companies, for CEOs, what they want the future of 4-day working week to look like is one that further enhance productivity and further, I think, enhance growth. So that's the opposite of what we want. We want less production, less consumption, less stress, and most of all, less shrinking the gap between the very rich and the very powerful, and those at the bottom, or just the ordinary people. So my worry is it a reasonable worry that by cutting down the workday to 4-day week, I'm all for it, but I mean, going forward, if the CEOs and big corporations shape it in a way so that there will actually be less work available in the future, combined with AI and automation. So I worry it's almost a form of disguised layoff kind of a plot or something like that. So it's like for degrowth proponents, we want more jobs spread even among more people and less working time for each one. But for the companies, is it possible they actually want to, with AI and automation, they actually want there to be fewer jobs, jobs replaced by AI and automation, and so there won't be more jobs available for human beings. And then because right now the 4-day work week requires the companies or suggests advise companies to keep the pay for 5-day work week. Is it possible that down the road, those corporations, they will, when it comes to time to call for increase in, say, minimum wage, the big companies, they will simply say, we've already given you an extra day off, so there's no chance for any increase in minimum wage. So my general point and the question is, going forward, how does that struggle look like for those of us who want the reduction in working time to be pro-degrowth, and the rich and powerful, they design 4-day week to fit their agenda. They won't suddenly become altruistic. It's all for their profits, their productivity. So I hope my question is not too complicated. Yeah, so
No.
there's my
Okay.
question.
So you raised lots of different things. Let's start with the first one and the impact of the 4-day week on output and growth. So for the most part, I mean, the basic model is that you have no reduction in productivity. So the 180-100 model, people are producing the same amount in 4 days as they are in 5. So it doesn't undermine degrowth. Now, it doesn't give you less growth. It just doesn't actually change the rate of growth. However, so that's the first point. It's just really important to be clear about what's happening. There are some companies where you do see some increases in productivity, and it's possible that those companies may be growing. That's going to most likely be happening anyway. And a number of these are like startups or, growing. Some companies are going to be growing. The question is, what is the relationship between productivity and growth? And here I don't have the fear that you have. And this is also, it's a more general response to what you're worried about happening. And it's the following. If you look historically, companies have historically, with the exception of those few companies that I talked about at the beginning, the leaders in the 5-day movement. So you have some companies at the beginning who want to go to 5 days, and then the labor movement comes in, and then it becomes the labor movement and the government who push the agenda. So you have these, they're not neoliberal employers at the beginning. They're an unusual set of let's just think of them as progressive employers to begin with. They're the ones who are the originators here, the so-called early adopters, and they care about workers' well-being. I mean, I've been doing interviews with a lot of these people. They're actually not like a rapacious neoliberal big company. They're not big. They're smaller companies. A lot of them are in professional services and so forth. The big companies will do this when they are forced to, because this is a worker demand and a demand from the state. And that's how it will go forward. And some of them will do it because they can, and they're rich, and things are starting to happen. But it's not a movement to hurt workers, and I don't think it ever will be, because it is something that is so beneficial to people's ability to get out of an overly demanding, stressful, overworked job into a reasonable pace of life means they can do all sorts of things, including fight for their rights and fight to not lose their jobs or fight for their wage increases. And it makes working people much better able to fight for their interests because they actually have time. Time is a crucial element in organization, in organizing, and in collective action and so forth. So I don't worry about it that way because it's a win. Now, to ask about the carbon impacts, the point is that if you are, as a society, are taking your productivity growth in the form of shorter hours, it means you are reducing your carbon emissions, because so much of carbon emissions is coming from the size of the economy. It's, the levels of output. And I think what we can see happening here, what I see happening as first you get this spreading. There are many companies for whom who won't be able to maintain productivity, but eventually they're going to have to do this because they won't be able to get workers. So the 100-80-100 model works at the beginning, but I said these low intensity workplaces can do it. The high intensity workplaces do it because they're burning people out. There are a lot in the middle that are already pretty efficient, and that they'd have to speed workers up to do it. So I think that what it does is it puts us on a path of future work time reduction. And this gets to your last point, which is about AI, because this is a big question about AI, which is what is going to happen to labor demand and what is going to happen to unemployment and wages and so forth. We don't know the answer to that now. It's unclear. The story that economists used to tell, which is everything's going to be fine, there's going to be a rise in productivity and everybody's going to get reemployed doing other things and so forth. Not even economists believe that now. And if you think about the Industrial Revolution, one of the big things, which has not been sufficiently understood in the literature, in my view, is that one of the big reasons you don't get mass unemployment after the Industrial Revolution is because you have big reductions in working hours. You go from a 60-hour work week down to a 40 from late 19th century to mid 20th century. So I don't know. I don't know what AI is going to do. I think this is a really positive from the point of view of that last point you made, which is spreading the work. If there's less available work for labor, then shorter hours mean that more people can have jobs. And it also means that I think that if we get a reduction in work time to a 4-day work week, it means labor has gotten strong enough to demand that. And so that will put it in a better position vis-a-vis AI, because right now they're in fairly weak position.
Thank you. We have Jane. Do you want to ask a question you've written at the chat room?
No, I was just writing what I felt was maybe like one of your main points when you were speaking. Yeah, but I do have a question, which is, have you any insights? Thank you. First of all, thank you, Dr. Schor, for your talk. And do you have any insights, or I would like to just discuss why East Asia has had a slower adoption, or not yet an adoption at all? I mean, having lived here for this long, I know that the culture is very pro lots of work time for some reason, lots of face time with the boss, right? So it's just part of the work culture. People just want to show that they're working to the boss. But I'm just curious if you've had conversations or tried or, to get any adoption in East Asia, and if you see any potential ways we could get in, get in there. Thank you.
So I personally am not, I'm not out there sort of trying to, set up trials and so forth. I mean, I have people who come to me, but I actually think there's a fair amount of opportunity in East Asia. So the Japanese government very early on, when we started getting publicity for this work, came out and said 4-day week is a good thing, and please, Japanese companies, you should do this. So I think there's some openness there. I think there's a lot of interest in Korea as well. And I've had, people contacting me from there, but I don't know about China. I think the situation in China is a little more complicated. But and we have a Singaporean trial starting, and maybe one in India too, that we have a partner now in India. So I don't know. I think they're going to come. But remember also, these are very small trials. These are not, the government is not suddenly saying, okay, everybody gets to work 4 days, and nobody's forcing companies to do anything. These are companies who are, and this gets us to the next question, the self-selection issue here with the company. So these are very small. We're talking about, 20 companies in a country for a trial. We're not, okay, the UK was, I think there were actually 70 in all. They didn't all participate in the research, but so, it's a tiny thing in some ways, but I would be surprised if in the next year we don't have some trials starting in East Asia. Let me, can I answer the question in the chat about selection bias?
Sure, please.
So, really important to be clear about what I'm claiming here and where we're talking about selection bias and where we're not. We have 2 kinds of research going on. One is company outcomes and the other is employee outcomes. So with the company outcomes, there's absolutely selection bias because these are companies who are selecting into these trials. So they obviously think this is something that could work for them. Now, there are a few it doesn't work for, but as the vast majority it does. And we would expect, sort of a standard economic analysis would expect them to know whether or not, to have a sense of whether or not it should work for them. I'm not worried about the selection bias with the companies because I'm not claiming that you can take a random set of companies and make it work. As I said a few minutes ago, I don't think that's actually true. The NGO will claim that, they'll say any company can do this, but I don't think that's right. We are, but I think the employee results are not, I don't think they're really very influenced by selection bias. Maybe a little bit. We have finally gotten some control companies in the current trial that we're studying. So we're going to look at how the employees in the treatment, the ones who get the 4-day week versus those who don't do. And so we expect to see big differences in the well-being outcomes, but we may not. We don't know. So confounding effects, the main thing I was worried about with confounding effects at the beginning was the coming out of the pandemic. So now we have a couple of years now. I think that's less an issue. You could put some other confounders in there if what you think they are. We have economies that are doing well and we have economies that are doing poorly. So like the UK trial, it occurred during a very bad time for the UK economy. And we still got really great results. Some of the other, in the US, it's been a better time, but we have so many countries that are experiencing different periods, in the macroeconomic context that I'm skeptical that that's what it is. And then The last thing about that is the RCT, a randomized control trial, because things have, I think, become kind of ridiculous with economists in some ways who are saying, like, if it's not a randomized control trial, it's meaningless. And the fact of the matter is, there's no way for us as an independent research group to run a randomized control trial because we have no leverage over these companies. If you are a drug company and people need access to your drug, you have leverage over them, and they'll go into a trial where it's randomized. If you are an economist, a development economist, going to a poor country and offering people mosquito nets and whatever, you have leverage over them. They will submit to a randomized control. But we have zero leverage over these companies. If they want to go to a 4-day week, they don't need us to do it. So it's not a viable methodology until you get something that you can give them that they won't get otherwise. And that's why the government trials are so important, because the government trials are starting, and I'm working with my state government and others to get government trials in which the companies get something, often it's a tax credit or something else that would allow them, would let them agree to go into a random control kind of trial. But even so, they're all self-selected. So it's just, that's just the way of the world with an intervention like this. And there are huge numbers of studies of workplace interventions, and they're all self-selected. The companies that do those things, and the employees are not, but the companies themselves are. So happy to come back on anything on that if you want to ask. Jane is asking another question, which is, how do companies get to participate in the trial? So at the very beginning, what we did was we used word of mouth, and we held information sessions, and put it out on social media. Come to this information session, learn about this trial. It was free to join. So in the beginning, companies joined without pay. Then we went to a suggested donation model, and then eventually the 4-day week global began charging. Not very much. I think something, maybe 10,000 euros or something to participate, and you get technical assistance, and we do the research for you. We don't select companies. Any company who wants to join can do so. They just have to, they can't reduce pay, and they have to reduce working hours. That's all. So and my team is an independent research team. We don't have any formal relationship with 4-day week global. We research the companies and so forth. But we also, if companies come to us and they want us to do the research for them, we lately have just been saying, okay, and we've just been doing it free for companies. In Taiwan, the issue will be whether or not it's English language research. So if it is, we could, a company who's interested could contact me. Feel free to give them my email, and we may be able to accommodate them and do the research. If we're dealing with translation, it gets a lot more complicated, and then I think you need to set up a local team that will do the translation and will manage the relationships. And if you're doing a translation, you would want to, probably get more than one company. And you can do it with 4-day week global or on your own. And my team is happy to research any company that's going to a 4-day week with no reduction in pay, just because we're interested in collecting as much data as we can.
Jane wrote, we can start anytime, or is there a timing?
We've got companies. So if you're just an individual company, we start, typically we've been trying to start 2 groups a month, but yeah, pretty much anytime. We're like a big vacuum cleaner. We're just sucking up, we're hoovering up data.
Can I ask, I think looking at the data, it looks like it's most of the trials are white collar jobs.
Yes.
So what about lower earning blue collar? What I remember I think you also talked about this somewhere, maybe in a talk or somewhere. Can you further explain how would this affect the larger labor force in societies, including blue collar workers?
Yeah. Well, there's nothing about this that is necessarily white collar. It's there are a couple of things. One is the I think the we have some manufacturing firms, for example. We have an RV recreation, like a motor vehicle company. Lamborghini, an automaker, just announced they're going to a 4-day week for many of their employees. There are other automakers who are considering this. In Germany, you have the Steelworkers Union who put a 32-hour week into their bargaining for IG Metall steelworkers, 80,000 workers. So there's nothing particular for white collar workers. What we've seen with the manufacturing and construction companies is, I mean, they'll do things a little bit differently because, for one thing, in the white collar world, the success comes because they have a lot of time wasting. So they have meetings and distractions and people talking to each other and all of that. In the blue collar world, it can happen, you know, depending on the manufacturing process, it can be, you can have some of that, but they don't have the meetings. You know, the meetings culture is a white collar world culture. So that's sort of an easy thing. What we found in some of these companies is they do things like, in the brewery, for example, they figured out that they were doing a lot of things sequentially that they could actually slot in at other times, so they could multitask. In the automobile company in Ohio, they bought a new machine that was much more efficient. They figured out who was better at doing certain tasks and they reallocated tasks. So that was another thing they did. So, I mean, their t-shirt factory, I was on a radio program with, there are people are doing this in all sorts of ways. In the restaurant, for example, I mean, that's basically like a manufacturing operation. You know, a restaurant, the kitchen is a you know, there's a process there. They gave their chefs a day off, and they changed the division of labor a little bit, where they gave some lower level people some of that work so that the chefs could go off. So that changing the division of labor, and that's what we're seeing in some of the nursing studies also. So we have a company that gave a big hospital chain that gave a group of nurses a day off, and these are nurse managers. A lot of the sort of lower level nurses are on 3-day week schedules anyway. They work 3 long shifts, but they reallocated some of the tasks across the nurse managers, to give people time off. So I think that's one of the big things that's happening, is, you know, looking at their division of labor in the blue collar.
I'd like to ask the 180, 100, and you also mentioned 180 and 80. Do you mean that 100 employee and 80% of the time and 80% of output, or 180, 80?
Yes. Yeah.
But
So the
which-
180/80s, there are companies that have high intensity of work, that are not expecting people to do 5 days work in 4, because 5 days work is too much for people. They're leaving, they're burning out, the quality is going down, and the employers understand that they have, their intensity is too high. I mean, this is what's happening with nurses in this country. It's also what's happening in the restaurants. They're losing lots of people because they're working them too hard. I'm also seeing this in some other contexts in which people are, the nonprofits. You have nonprofits where people are just burning out because they're too stressed out. And so the employers are just saying, okay, you're working 1 day less, that's it. They're not worrying about getting their productivity up or reorganizing work or anything. And they're saving a lot of money because people stop leaving. No, it's 180, 80, yeah, 80% productivity, 100% salary, 80% hours, 80% productivity. There's no attempt to reorganize those 4 days. There's no attempt to do as much in 4 days as they did in 5. They're just giving people a break. They're just giving them time off. Just go home, recharge, rest, come back rested. And so I think we're going to see a larger and larger number of companies who are following that 180-80 model, because these are in the burnout occupations and industries, in healthcare, in food service, in nonprofits, and there are probably some others that we're not seeing yet. But healthcare is huge. We're seeing it in nurses. We're seeing mental health professionals are getting it, because these organizations understand what's happening to their workers, and that it's really not viable.
Okay, thank you. Do we have more questions from the audience? If not, can I ask one more question?
Yeah, and then I need to go to bed.
Oh, okay. As I said, I'm totally for a 4-day working week, but I still have that bit of worry about what they are trying to do. I mean, the rich one and the powerful. And one thing that came to mind is also, what do people do with the extra time? And it's also how what you talked about in your previous work about work and spend cycle. Is that how you phrased it? Work and spend cycle. Yeah. So are those rich and powerful, are they, what they have in mind, do they want to optimize that? Do they want to optimize work and spend cycle to fit what they want? Because you when you talked about Henry Ford, he was conscious that you need to let people have time and money to spend to buy the things that he produced. So if we look at what happened afterwards, after Henry Ford introduced whatever he introduced, he campaigned for 5-day working week, and he also, well, he was smart enough to make people spend more money to buy stuff, and that actually happened. So is it similar this time? Do the rich and powerful, they want to optimize that spend and work cycle to fit their interests, not the degrowth?
First of all, it's not the rich and powerful who are driving this. The rich and powerful are not doing anything yet about it. These are small companies. Many of them are founders, that's not who's behind this. And they haven't come out against it, I think, mostly because it's too popular. They don't really want to engage it yet. It's too small. It's not a threat. Let's see how things go. Believe me, there will be plenty of rich and powerful who are going to try and stop this if it gains momentum. But I think you've got the wrong idea about what's happening with it and sort of who's behind it and so forth. It's a little bit different in some of the European countries where you have, but it's it's not the right-wing parties that are doing this. It's the more, labor-oriented social democratic parties. And they're also just worried about what's going to happen with AI and how they're going to keep people employed in Europe where there isn't growth and so forth. So it's a little bit different. It differs by country. Henry Ford was in trouble when he put the 5-day week in. And this is not work and spend. You can see what people are doing here. They're doing hobbies. They're taking care of their households. They're not getting any more money. So this is their pay is not changing. They're just getting some more free time. And the idea, the whole Henry Ford thing, and that he understood the impact of what he was doing with his workers, it has no impact on the demand for cars. I mean, they're just a teensy little number of people compared to the market for cars. So Henry Ford, giving his workers more money does not create a market for cars. It's a fallacy that it's just like too many people on the left think that Henry Ford was some great genius who figured out that there's a demand problem in capitalism. And the famous story is that it was Walter Reuther who told him that, the head of the union, that he has to pay people to so they can afford to buy cars. But remember, auto workers are just a little fraction of the market. So no, this is not about work and spend. This is just about work and working less. And I think that if you think about the history of progressive forces, work time reduction goes away when workers lose power. And work time reduction comes back when workers get more power. And so it's not, the fact that the UAW in the United States, after decades and decades of having nothing to say about work time, when they finally got serious about organizing and claiming power, which is what has happened with this new UAW, they put work time reduction on the agenda. And if you look at the history of work time reduction, it's been a most progressive and laborist demand. And also women and environment and other forces too. But it's really key to building a powerful movement to counter capital.
Thank you so much. I feel very much reassured now because of the World Economic Forum and all the pro-business media that they really got me worried. But your explanation is very, it makes a lot of sense.
The media is another thing because the journalists themselves are really overworked. They love this topic. And there's one other thing I learned this last week. I did an interview with the National Public Radio in the US, and what the interviewer told me was the public loves these stories. Their audience, they eat them up. So in part, the media is telling these stories because people are reading them.
Great.
Okay. Great to meet you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the talk, and thanks everyone. Good night.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Good night. Good. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.